Hey guys, this is Dan Wolwack with Coalcracker Bushcraft. Today I want to talk about crisis and a cold weather fire. So stay tuned and we'll get started. Okay, so what I wanted to discuss today with everybody is fire in a cold weather. Now, I don't want to go over too many fire basics in this video. I more wanted to talk about stress-related crisis and starting a fire. And what I mean by that is a lot of times in a survival bushcraft community, we talk a lot about making a quick fire. And that is an important skill to have, but we need to think around that, okay? That skill needs to be solid, and that's why we train so much to have a fast fire. If it's a 1 or 2 minute fire from when we first strike that ferrocerium rod or start that flint and steel, we need that to be quick and efficient. But the reality is that when we look at the entire situation as a whole, that needs to be secondary to what's really going on. So let's take an example such as this. You're crossing a stream with your trapping sled, you think it's frozen over, you break through. Now you're soaking wet, you're far out, and temperature's dropping. So you need to get an emergency fire started to rewarm yourself and control your body's core temperature. So the crisis mode is not only going to be you falling in the water, but you need to get a fire started, okay? So this is where a downfall I think a lot of people don't look at, is that they start to think right away that the crisis is going to be, I got to make that fire fast. The crisis mode is from when you fall in that water to gather these materials, then strike that ferrocerium rod to get that fire started. So that's why I'm saying that ferrocerium rod strike or that lighter or whatever you're using as an ignition source, that all needs to be secondary. Okay, your crisis mode is going to be from I'm wet until I get that first flame started. So it's collecting all that wood. This amount of wood is going to definitely be a sustainable fire for me, okay? And I'm not going to have to get up instantly and go off running out looking for wood. And if I'm wet and I'm cold, I'm not going to want to do that because my dexterity is going to be off and I'm going to be in a frustrated state, a stressed out state to begin with. So you need to identify that in the front end and just be aware of that and mentally prepare yourself that I'm going out in the winter. My crisis mode is from when I get wet until I light that fire. Okay, what we train for though is lighting that fire. So when we light that fire for the first time, it should ignite. We put our sticks on properly, we have a proper fire lay, boom, we have heat, we're good to go. So if you can identify with that, you're already ahead of the curve. Okay, so they're the kind of things we want to look at in survival type scenarios. We always end up just narrowing right down to the skill. And the skill, like I said, it's super important, but the crisis and the hardest part for most individuals who train and train and train is gonna be, I'm in the water, I'm wet, now I have for 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes collect material to make that fire. The untrained individual is going to struggle through that collecting process and the fire making process. So that's why we want to be able to eliminate that factor of making fire and just collecting. That's where our crisis mode lays. So once we gather our materials, and you can see there's a lot of materials here, one thing I like to do is I like to take some of my larger material I gathered and lay that down. That's going to act as a buffer between the cold ground, the wet ground, and it's not going to allow the heat to be sucked down through, okay? So it's building a base down. That's a super important thing I always found. Next, of course, you want to carry some type of surefire. In this case, we're using a ferrocerium rod and surefire that we have here. So we're going to just lay that down and then, of course, start to build up our fire lay. Now again, this is going to be, at this point, you're going to be in a state of absolute stress and probably panic because you're going to start to lose dexterity. You're going to be super cold. So you're going to want to get to the point where this is secondary, but this is why we train so much around fire and having quick fires. So a couple strikes with the ferrocerium rod will get this started, will get this ignited. Now we don't have to run around. We can just focus on rewarming ourselves. So we want to come in here to start. Get that started. Again, when you're doing this, you're taking everything you learned over time and trained with to better this. So what we're doing now is we're just taking our smalls and we're putting them over. I'm thinking what direction the wind's coming. I'm thinking where is going to fuel that, where the wind's going to fuel that fire, and or if it's going to blow it out if it's a heavier wind. Okay, and all that we're doing is just setting all our small, medium to large wood on this fire lay. Now again, I just pretty organized, but when you're picking your wood, in a situation under stress, you still want to be able to think through that. So these are things that you want to think about ahead of time before we get to the point that an actual situation happens. You can see there was no stress starting this fire at all for me. And if I was soaking wet now, I can take off my clothes and I can be right here, or I can keep my wool on and just stay right next to this fire. All I have to worry about now is just fueling this fire to keep myself warm. So they're the kind of things I want you guys to think about when you're training. Not only the skill itself, but how does that skill relate in different environments at different times of the year, and where is your stress going to occur, because that's something that we overlook all the time. We struggle so much with the skill sometimes that we don't look at that skill needs to be secondary. Where does the stress come from? I hope you enjoyed this video. If you haven't already, check us out on Facebook, also on Instagram at Dan Wowak, and enjoy yourself in the woods, guys.